Hey guys, and welcome back to another Watch Trading Academy video. Today we are talking about networking, something that not only is going to help you sell obviously a lot more watches, but historically the real question about what is the correlation between watches and networking, and do they really open more doors? This is a question that you guys have been asking in the comments a lot in my videos. How has owning a watch helped you network? Which is a very good question. You know, for a long time, since I've been doing this for 20 years, I used to say that your watch and your car were your entry point into peer groups, meaning typically when you go to car shows or you hang out with people or are talking business at a table, people can't really see your phone. You can't pull out your online banking and be like, yo, I got like $10 million. Take a look at my bank account. That should mean that I'm an accredited investor or conversation person to talk to. You can't really do that, and you can't wear your bank account here in your head, and your car could be leased. So often when we look at, cars as a dictation of wealth, it's usually not a good indicator because one, most people's viewpoints are completely skewed about cars. They think owning a Lamborghini makes you rich. There are many Lamborghinis you can buy for much cheaper than a base Range Rover, so it doesn't necessarily make you rich. Now, there are some Lamborghinis that are significantly out of line, out of reach to the average consumers that would speak to how much disposable income you have, even if it was a lease, but still, nonetheless, having even $5,000 a month on a car payment does not necessarily make you a person of value or someone to discuss or have a conversation with. So, on the other hand, the watches pose a very different entry point for one reason. Watches are cash, meaning very rare for people to put a $200K watch on their Amex and kind of make payments on it, right? In addition to that, watches typically are additional income. People need a car, they don't have to have a crazy watch. And usually watches are on a conservative basis, meaning if you have $1 million, for example, you wear a 10K watch, 20K watch, and so on and so forth. You're not wearing a $500,000 cash watch on $1 million total net worth, right? So again, unless maybe you're in the business, there are people who do that because they're buying inventory. But the majority of normal people who are not in the business typically don't spend $500,000 on a watch if they're only worth $1 million, right? So historically, while watches are a good place to park money, and we've talked about watches being good investments here, historically, that's really been the norm for the last 2 to 3 years as more consumers have understood and accepted that watches are investments. Prior to that, watches were a vanity and investments to those who owned them, but they were a vanity to those on the outside that looked at it as no different than wearing 3 Cartier bracelets if you're a woman or wearing your Hermes bag. It tells others what basic social status you hold. And that was the same with Rolexes being very popular in the finance markets, like bank manager, hedge fund managers wearing them and basically being like the rich guys because they had them, etc. And today, since the watch market is so spread out and so many more people are playing with watches, that has changed significantly. So there are people that are worth $10, $15, $20 million wearing 100K watches, and there are people worth $1 million wearing 100K watches. But in general, we have seen that watches still come from a place of liquidity, cash, and capacity to act and close deals. So it does help in the sense that it is your business card. And the dollar of your watch typically says more about your net worth when you're sitting at a table with a ton of people. Again, we are taking the jeweler context out of this and just normal people sitting here and making purchases. And we're talking about someone wearing a 300K watch typically has more buying power or signing power or capacity power than someone wearing a $10,000 watch. And historically, you also have to realize one key thing about reading people's wealth status, etc. There are a ton of people who would tell you that they don't want to spend money on cars. So I get that a lot. Like, people always tell me this and they go, well, listen, who cares? Warren Buffett had a Camry. One, you're not Warren Buffett. Or they go, well, Zuckerberg wore a hoodie. Okay, Zuckerberg and Bezos, while may not be dressing like in the photos you see on the internet or have been spread on the internet as people who spend, but both have Pagani collections. So let's get real. People spend their money. Just because you see a meme on the internet doesn't mean that's the way they live their life. Just because they have a photo wearing a hoodie or hanging out on vacation and no car in sight. Not everybody shares and spreads their, wealth in the same way or dictates it that way, but it doesn't make one right or wrong. It's just the way people choose to spend their money. But one of the arguments here about just understanding how to read social status and how it comes into networking is really simple. When someone tells you they're not a car person, and which is why they don't spend their money on cars. But yet they are still driving a 100K car. Like they're driving maybe a base model Range Rover, and they're saying they don't care about cars. Well, that's a lie, because it doesn't really relate. Like if you're spending 100K on a car, you do care for your car and you do think it matters to your social status. So you're basically lying to those who have more, pretending like you could also buy a 300K car, a $500,000 car, but you choose not to. And that's certainly never the case. In my 20 years, I've never met someone who could, who liked, and who didn't. That's a very big thing. Same with watches. Well, it's very true that someone could wear a $10,000 Rolex and say that, oh, I'm not big into watches. Well, then the point is, why are you wearing a Rolex? Oh, I like something that keeps good time. Well, you can have your phone. So the point is, the fact that you're wearing a Rolex tells the audience that you do care about how others perceive you. The fact that you are doing that itself speaks that. Now, that you can't go into a 100K Rolex or a 300K Rolex, or could maybe go to 30K Rolex and are choosing not to, that I can believe that you have the choice between a 10 or 20,000 watch, and maybe the 10K watch seemed better value to you. But to say that you're willing to wear a $10,000 watch and you wouldn't wear a $100,000 watch when you chose to do the $10,000 watch to begin with makes no sense either. So I think that a lot of times one of the things you'll realize is that watches do tell a very clear story about social status. Secondly, I think the other part that you'll also notice over time is that individuals who tend to want to wear watches by wearing fakes, etc., will typically want to associate with a crowd they can't be part of, even if they have excuses such as, well, I don't like spending money on watches, so I wear this fake, which is bullshit. If they had the liquidity, they would do it. Why else would they care to showcase a fake watch then? Why don't you just not wear a watch, or wear an Apple Watch, or wear a fairly cheap, normal watch from the mall? Meaning you don't have to wear an expensive watch to have a very nice, precise timekeeping item. If you really cared not to spend money, then you wouldn't spend any money whatsoever. So, I've been a big believer that the last 20 years has opened this door for people, one, to fake wealth, and secondly, for individuals to pretend to be more than they are, but finally, for people to have a very good indication of people's wealth level based on the type of watches they wear. Now, there are people that may seem richer because they're in this business and they have 20 to 30 watches, and there are people who are going to seem certainly a lot less rich because they're supposed to have a lot of watches and they don't. But just like any good jeweler would buy all the watches they could if they can to resell them, right? Any limited jeweler would not, because they wouldn't have the capacity to do that. So you can usually tell the size or the backing of the jewelry store based on the inventory they hold versus they consign. And the same thing with the basic consumers who are showcasing and using these watches. Now, watches can be an incredible tool to get in and out of peer groups, like I said, and a really useful tool to engage in conversation where people take you seriously, not just for your love of watches, but also for the fact that you can clearly, distinctively tell someone's social status just based on what they're wearing. So hopefully you found this helpful, and again, let me know your thoughts. Do you know a lot of people? I'm not talking about the exception of this one guy that's holding $10 million in a mattress and chose to wear like a Tissot or Longines. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the norm, not the exception. So click like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe watches tell a good story of someone's net worth or not?